Okay, imagine this. You walk downtown, maybe your usual route, and a whole shopping center is just ransacked. Or you hear about a local shop owner, someone you might even know, having to use a gun to fend off robbers.
Yeah, it's pretty startling stuff.
And these aren't just, hypothetical situations. They're real things happening in U.S. cities right now,
Welcome, everyone, to The Deep Dive.
where we try to get beneath the surface of the headlines.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into a few really interconnected things happening across cities like Chicago, Milpitas, California, and San Francisco. We're looking at these events that really put a spotlight on, well, challenges to public order, the strain on police, and these really complex, sometimes heated debates about crime and how we handle it. To help us sort through this, we've got excerpts from a YouTube video transcript. It's quite something. It covers everything from these big, dramatic retail thefts, smash and grabs, to really intense protests and even major federal law enforcement actions.
Yeah, it's a lot packed into one source.
It really is. It gives you this window into all the different tensions playing out. Right. And our mission for you today, basically, is to untangle these things that might seem separate at first glance. We want to pull out the key insights, help you see the different viewpoints, the issues underneath it all, without getting, totally lost in the details. What's fascinating, I think, is how these individual stories, even though they're happening in different places, they actually connect. They paint this bigger picture of public safety, different enforcement approaches, and maybe even some of the deep divides in how people are reacting.
Okay, so let's start unpacking that. First up, Chicago. The source we looked at, it describes just absolute chaos. Gangs, it says, basically wiped out a shopping center downtown. And we're not talking small scale here. Thieves ramming a car right into a luxury store. Then people, described as wearing dark clothes, just rushing in, grabbing whatever they can, and jumping into getaway cars.
Planned escape routes and everything.
Exactly. Some cars pulled up just for the getaway. Others were apparently already parked nearby. Then they just sped off. The source mentioned 3 specific scenes that morning. W in Michigan, Ohio and Michigan, and then down on Lakeshore Drive near Roosevelt.
Right. Quite a cluster.
Yeah, and police, at the time the source was recorded, hadn't officially said if they were all linked, but, the way it's described, it sounds pretty coordinated.
It really does. And that Chicago incident, it really highlights something important, I think. It's how retail crime seems to be evolving. It's gone way beyond, someone slipping something into their bag.
Yeah.
It's almost like industrial scale looting. These groups seem so organized, so bold.
Hostels.
Exactly. And that presents a huge challenge for police for the usual ways of responding. The speed, the coordination. It suggests they've really thought about vulnerabilities. Retailers aren't just losing money. They're left feeling incredibly insecure.
That phrase, calculated understanding of vulnerabilities, that really hits home. And Chicago isn't alone in seeing this kind of, brazenness. There's a similar story, maybe even more personal and terrifying, out of Milpitas, California.
Okay.
Our source talks about an attempted robbery at a fine jewelry store there in the South Bay, and it sounds incredibly violent. Armed, masked people, hoodies up, trying to smash their way in with hammers, even pickaxes.
Wow. Hammers and pickaxes.
Yeah. But here's the really intense part. The owner and an employee were inside, and the owner fought back, fired a gun, scared them off.
Goodness.
But the context makes it even heavier. Apparently, this same store was robbed 2 years ago, and that time the thieves got away.
Oh, man.
So the source says the owner is just understandably deeply traumatized, thinking about closing the business, maybe even moving away.
And that Milpitas story, it's more than just self-defense, isn't it? It really shows the deep psychological toll this takes on small business owners when public order feels like it's breaking down. Yeah. When people feel they have to be their own protectors, that really signals something's wrong with the social contract,
Yeah.
And the long-term effect on just the spirit of wanting to run a business, on community trust, it can be huge. It pushes businesses out, leaves these gaps. It really makes you ask, what happens to a community when people feel that vulnerable?
That's such a critical point. And then, okay, let's say law enforcement does catch someone. What does that look like on the ground? Our source gives us the snapshot from San Francisco that kind of highlights the resource issue we're talking about.
Okay.
It describes an arrest of just one single individual. But it took, initially, 2 officers, then 3, 4, 5 cops, plus sheriffs showing up too.
For one person.
For one person. And all this while, apparently, there was an activist right there screaming at police, as the source puts it.
Right. And that scene, that really puts a finger on a major challenge for police departments, everywhere. The source said something like, it took the whole force to get one guy.
Yeah.
So what are the ripple effects when one arrest needs that many people? It's not just the immediate time and effort, right? It leaves gaps elsewhere. It leads to exactly what the source worried about other crimes, maybe sliding, just going unanswered because everyone's tied up. Police are constantly having to make these tough calls. Is this important enough to pull people from that?
Right.
And if the answer is no, it can easily look like enforcement is just less present for a lot of other things impacting the community.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit, but still related to public order and enforcement. Our source also takes us deep into the world of immigration enforcement, again focusing on Chicago. It paints this picture of the scene outside the Chicago ICE detention center. Activists camped out, directly confronting federal agents, screaming at them. And one detail really stands out. The source says agents were wearing masks.
Why?
Because, according to the source, people described as criminal activists were trying to identify them, to basically dox them. The source uses some really strong language here, likening the whole vibe to the party of political violence.
Wow, that's intense framing.
It is. And it makes a direct comparison suggesting Chicago needs border security, like the ICE facility in LA saying flat out, walls work.
Yeah, that really throws the ideological battle lines into sharp relief, doesn't it? It's presented not just as a protest, but as a direct threat to the agents themselves, making them feel they need anonymity for safety.
Exactly.
And it shows how language itself becomes part of the conflict. Both sides using these really loaded terms to define the situation, frame their opponents. It just highlights how little common ground there seems to be in that specific fight.
And happening alongside this local tension, there are these federal operations going on too. The source mentions the Trump administration's Operation Midway Blitz. The stated goal was targeting undocumented people who officials call the worst of the worst.
Right. Federal perspective.
Yeah, Tom Homan from the White House perspective basically saying it was about getting more boots on the ground, sending a message that, there are consequences for violating our laws. But then the source points out this real split with local leadership. It says Illinois Governor Pritzker told ICE to, and I quote, take it down about 3 notches.
Huh. Direct conflict there.
Right. And the source questions that, asking, does he want to protect the criminals? It really shows how different levels of government can have totally opposing priorities on enforcement. And adding another layer, the source mentioned this significant ICE presence, like 100 ICE vehicles, 200 agents on standby around Chicago, specifically near Illinois courthouses where people were apparently showing up
voluntarily. The source sounded skeptical.
Very skeptical, questioning how they entered the U.S. if they weren't, running away from authority. Called the voluntary claim absolutely ridiculous. But then, on the city level, you had Alderman Andrew Napolitano from the 41st Ward saying something different. He welcomed federal help, FBI, DEA, even National Guard, because, he said, the Chicago Police Department is short-staffed. His quote was pretty blunt. We're not going to turn down more bodies. So you've got all these layers. What does this actually mean for a city like Chicago and for you trying to wrap your head around it all?
Well, it really brings up big questions about, federalism, right?
Yeah.
Who's in charge of what? When local police are short-staffed, as the source and the alderman point out, it creates this vacuum. And the source suggests that this situation, maybe combined with certain local policies, can unintentionally empower a criminal element.
Sending a message that maybe rules aren't strictly enforced.
Kind of. And this is where that whole idea of sanctuary cities often comes into the mix.
Yeah.
Just so everyone's clear. A sanctuary city usually means a local place that limits how much it helps federal immigration enforcement. The idea is often to build trust so immigrants feel safe reporting crimes, for example.
Right.
But federal agencies often see those policies getting in the way, especially when they're targeting people they label the worst of the worst.
So it's a direct clash.
Exactly. The source really highlights that tension. Different ideas about safety, community trust, playing out between different levels of government.
And while all this enforcement activity is happening, you also have these big public reactions. The source describes about 200 demonstrators right out on Michigan Avenue and Congress Plaza, making their voices heard.
What was their main message?
They were calling things unjust for the immigrant community. Signs mentioned fighting and destruction, fight back. They were chanting that the city is a welcoming city. Their goal, they said, was to break the ICE, in Illinois courts and fight back against what they called escalated icy raids and attacks against our communities.
Okay, so a strong, welcoming city fight-back message.
Yeah, but what's interesting is how the source contrasts that directly with its own perspective.
So, well, the source basically challenges that narrative. It argues, look, if you're here legally, IC isn't interested. If you're here illegally and you're a fugitive, well, maybe that's why you choose a sanctuary city. It goes further, suggesting the protesters might not see the bigger picture, that federal fugitives, by definition, potentially make places less safe, and that they might even enable this sort of criminal underworld that exploits undocumented workers through illegal labor.
So a fundamental disagreement on who belongs, what safety means, what justice looks like.
Exactly. It's a clash of core definitions. And that clash itself becomes part of the public order challenge we're talking about.
And one last point on the protests, the source noted that while organizers said they'd be peaceful,
There was a but.
yeah, there was a prediction or maybe an observation that these kinds of demonstrations often descend into madness or lead to things that are less peaceful later on, implying a potential for things to get out of hand.
That observation about protests potentially escalating, that's a really key part of understanding public order, too.
Yeah.
It highlights how fragile things can be when emotions are running high and people deeply disagree about what's legal, what's right.
Yeah.
If you connect that to the bigger picture, it's not just about that one protest, but the simmering tensions that could spark future problems. It makes you think about that line, sometimes a very fine line between peaceful protest, which is vital, and actions that undermine the law or safety.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, we've really covered a lot of ground, some intense stuff. We saw the impact of this really bold street crime, the organized theft on businesses, on communities.
The immediate impact.
We looked at law enforcement trying to respond, often stretched thin, facing really difficult situations. And then we got into these really passionate, often clashing views about immigration, safety, enforcement, especially in a place like Chicago, dealing with all these pressures at once.
Yeah. It's a lot to process. Maybe a final thought to leave you with, something to kind of mull over. When you think about all these different challenges we've discussed, the retail crime, the immigration enforcement clashes, the protests, the different responses from people, from local police, from federal agents, what kind of balance do you actually think is possible between having really robust enforcement, but also building real community support? Especially in a city that wants to be seen as both safe and welcoming? It's a tough one. It gets right to the heart of how cities function, how we live together.
That is a powerful question to consider, and one that definitely goes beyond just the specific incidents we talked about today. We hope this deep dive gave you some things to think about, maybe see how these issues connect in your own communities. Thanks for joining us.